The most important library in human history, gone. Thousands of years of knowledge, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy from every civilization on earth vanished. And for centuries, everyone pointed at the same people. Muslims burned them down. That was the story. That's what got taught. That's what spread. And it was a lie. The real story of who actually destroyed it and why someone needed to pin the blame on an entirely different group of people is one of the most deliberate cover-ups in recorded history. So let's get into it. First, the Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building with books and a librarian who shushes you. Shh! It was part of an enormous research complex called the museum, which, by the way, is literally where the word museum comes from. You're welcome. Use that at your next dinner party. The museum had lecture halls, gardens, a zoo, shrines, and sitting right at the center of it all was the library. Founded around 283 BCE under Ptolemy I in Alexandria, Egypt. And the mission was almost hilariously ambitious. Collect every single book ever written. Not some books, not most books, all of them. Every scroll, every manuscripts, every text from every culture, every comic book, every manga, every self-help scroll on how to be a better Roman citizen. Alright, I'm messing with you with the comic books weren't a thing yet. But everything else? Yeah, they genuinely wanted all of that. And they were dead serious. If a merchant ship sailed into the harbor of Alexandria, not Beer Harbor, and happened to be carrying books, the Egyptians would just confiscate them, keep the originals, send the ship back with copies. Wave goodbye. I don't respect that in any way or form. At its peak, the library held somewhere between 40,000 and 900,000 scrolls. Historians still argue about the exact number. Those scrolls had Greek philosophy, Persian science, Indian mathematics, Assyrian, Zoroastrian, and Buddhist texts, all under one roof. Basically the ancient internet, except the Wi-Fi was terrible because there was no Wi-Fi. Alright, now here's the popular the story, and I need you to hold on to it because we're about to tear it apart piece by piece. Julius Caesar was in Alexandria, combating his forces during a war. A fire broke out, the entire library burned to the ground. All that knowledge gone in one night, and because of that single moment, or so the story goes, humanity was plunged into what people call the Dark Ages, a total era of ignorance, all because of one fire, and that's how it ends. Now, here's the truth. Caesar was there. 48 BCE, Civil War. There was definitely a fire. Nobody is denying that. But Caesar's fire hit the harbor, specifically some warehouses near the docks. The main library during the Civil War largely unaffected. How do we know? Because a writer named Didymus Calcentris worked in Alexandria after Caesar left and produced between 3,500 and 4,000 books by himself. You do not write 4,000 books in a library that's been burned to the ground. That's just not how ruins work. And on top of that, Mark Antony later gifted Cleopatra 200,000 scrolls for the library well after the fire. You don't send 200,000 scrolls to a pile of ash. So Caesar burned it all? Better movie scene than actual history. Here's what actually happened. The library didn't die in one dramatic moment. It faded slowly, painfully over centuries from multiple cuts. Cut 1. Around 145 BCE, King Ptolemy VIII, they really kept using this name, got into political fight with his own brother, and as power moved, banished every single foreign scholar from Alexandria. All of them gone over a family argument. That is not a fire. That is genuinely terrible management. Feel free to clip this and send it directly to your manager. Cut 2. In 391 CE, a Christian bishop named Theophilus led an attack on the library's second branch, the Serapeum. And to be clear, this was the second branch, not the main library itself. But it was destroyed. Real documented a significant loss. Cut 3. And this is the one nobody talks about. Papyrus. Papyrus scrolls are extremely fragile. They rot. They decay. Without scribes constantly copying everything, those scrolls didn't need a fire. They just quietly fell apart on their own, with nobody watching, with nobody caring, until it was too late. Now here's where it gets deliberately ugly. There's a famous story that when General Omar ibn al-Aus led the Muslim forces that conquered Alexandria in 640 CE, he wrote back to the Caliph Omar radiallahu anhu, who was the Caliph at the time back in Medina, not physically present in Alexandria, asking what should be done with the library. And the Caliph Omar supposedly replied, if the books agree with the Quran, unnecessary. If they disagree, heresy. Burn them all. And when somebody reads that, they would say now, that is a perfect villain line. There is just just one enormous problem with that. This story was written down for the first time by a historian named Ibn al-Qifti around 1227 CE. That is 600 years after the events it's describing. That's like someone sitting down today and writing a first-hand account of something that happened in 1425 and everyone just believing it. Britannica. And I want to be clear, I'm not talking about a blog or a Reddit thread. I'm talking about the Encyclopedia Britannica. Looked into the story and called it directly a 12th century fabrication. Historian Roy MacLeod, emeritus professor of classical studies, laid out 3 problems with it. 1. The story appeared over 500 years after the supposed event. 2. The scholar Caliph Umar bin Khattab was supposedly speaking to John Peloponnesus, was almost certainly already dead by 640 CE. He wasn't even there. And 3, the library was almost certainly already gone by the time General Umar ibn Qais and his forces even arrived in Alexandria. You cannot burn down a building that no longer exists. And historian Bernard Lewis traced the whole history back to the reign of Salah ad-Din in the 12th century, invented specifically to justify Salah ad-Din's controversial decision to break up the great Fatimid libraries in Cairo. Someone needed a historical precedent to make him look less bad. So they made one up and they pinned it on Caliph Umar bin Khattab. And here's the proof that really buries it. In the 500 years between the Arab conquest and the first time the story appeared in writing, not one historian mentioned it. Not one Christian writer, not one Byzantine chronicle, not even Eutychius, the Archbishop of Alexandria in 933 CE, who wrote in extensive detail about the Arab conquest of his own city, said nothing about any library burning, nothing. And again, Britannica calls it a fabrication. History.com calls it a fabrication, while Wikipedia calls it completely untenable. That is not a fringe opinion. That is a mainstream historical consensus. So why did someone need to invent this story in the first place? Because the real story pointed directly at the people in power, and powerful people have always been very, very good at making sure that version doesn't get told. Caesar never once claimed responsibility for the hyperfire. His own associates went completely silent about it. There may have been imperial pressure not to comment. Think about that. The most powerful man in the Roman world accidentally damaged one of humanity's greatest institutions, and the people around him just said nothing because saying it out loud was dangerous. So what do you do when the truth points at you? You find someone who can't fight back. You invent a villain. You turn a slow, embarrassing, centuries-long failure into one clear, dramatic moment, and you make sure someone else take the blame for it. Historian Diana Delia documented exactly this. The fabricated story about Umar radiallahu anhu and General Umar ibn Aus was likely devised and exploited by conservative authorities as a political precedent created specifically to serve a purpose. Diana Delia, From Romance to Rhetoric, the Alexandria Library in Classical and Islamic Traditions, Roman Invasion, Christian Riot, Islamic Purge. Every single time a new political rivalry needed a villain, someone pointed at that library and said they did it. Not because evidence said so, because it was convenient. And this pattern didn't start in the 12th century, and it didn't end there. Scholar Jonathan Lyons traced it all the way back to First Crusade propaganda in the 11th century, noting this framing has been adapted as needed by varying political actors ever since. In 2025, not the 12th century, 2025, author Gilbert Sinu published an entire book to counter Western historians still claiming the Arab world contributed nothing to human civilization. This is still happening right now in our lifetime. Here's the part that genuinely gets me. The Library of Alexandria didn't fully burn. Some of what was inside it survived. When scholars were expelled, they took texts with them. Copies had been sent out to the ancient world for decades. Christian libraries preserved many manuscripts. Some ended up in Constantinople, some in monasteries across Europe, and some, in the most ironic twist in this entire story, ended up in the very Islamic libraries the fabricated burning story was trying to blame, specifically Baghdad. The scholars of Beit al-Hikmah were literally preserving and translating the very knowledge that someone invented it, a story, or say they destroyed. The people blamed for burning knowledge were the ones saving it. The loss was enormous and real and genuinely heartbreaking. But one villain, one fire, one night erasing everything, that is not a story. That is a movie pitch. The Library of Alexandria didn't die because someone hated knowledge. It died because the people who were supposed to protect it stopped caring. Rulers stopped funding it. Scholars got expelled. Scrolls fell apart because nobody paid anyone to copy them. And when it was truly finally gone, someone decided the most useful thing to do was to blame someone else entirely. And that someone else carried the blame for over 1,000 years. This story was never really about fire. It was really about villains. It's about what happens when people in power stop being honest about their own families. And how, when that happens, the wrong people always end up paying the price. And just for your information, the same strategy is still being used nowadays. And I will really be willing to cover this up. If this video reaches up 100 likes, I'm going to cover up that part. Thank you all for watching. Bye.